certain other countries. So anything which is any inanimate object that is present on the body, be it a mobile phone or uh, a wallet or a laptop or a driving license or any letter or any personalized diary, anything that is present along with that body is a personal effect. And personal effects are a very good means of giving the probable identity of the body. But of course, as it is a non-scientific technique, as it is a secondary technique, one should not rely upon them very much, because they can be purposefully planted over there to misguide the total investigation. And of course, visual recognition is discouraged because of the reasons that I'll discuss in upcoming slides. The next are the scientific and or primary methods of identification, and they are the most sought after methods of identification. And in that, we can see we have four methods, that is fingerprints, DNA. Both of them you know very well, they are unique for every individual. We have medical identification, and lastly the dental identification that we'll talk about. So you might not be knowing how medical identification works, so I'll tell you how it works. At certain times people meet with accidents, or they need to have any cardiac stent. So a person can have a medical device implanted into their body, such as a person who has met with an accident and who has fractured his arm will have a plate which is joining this the bone, that is humerus bone. Or a person might have a shoulder, prosthetic shoulder, or a prosthetic knee joint, or a prosthetic hip joint. So all these medical devices, that is prosthetic devices, have a unique serial code which is engraved on them. So when a autopsy surgeon is performing autopsy and he comes across such a medical processes, and he will take a note of the serial code of this particular medical processes, and when it is matched with antemortem record, it comes to a he comes to a positive identification through medical identification modality. So it is a good technique, but the chances of some person having a medical prosthesis are far too less as compared to a person having a dental treatment, right? So not many people are meeting with accident, not many people are undergoing having to place a metallic rod or a plate, or cardiac stent or a renal stent. So these particular treatments are pretty they are rare. But the dental treatments are pretty much common, and every other person is having some sort of dental treatment. And even if a person is not having dental treatment, still dental identification could be achieved because of certain inherent or inborn or congenital uniquenesses present in their mouth. So this is a quick summary of all these methods that I have discussed so far. On top left side, you can see there is a tattoo. So that Om Namah Shivaya tattoo, pretty rare one, about because of its particular size, shape, and location. It still falls into non-scientific category, and it is a identification through visual recognition. In the top row, the middle image is of a femur bone, that is the thigh bone present in humans, and there is a metal prosthesis, that is an artificial hip joint, which will have a unique code laser etched on it, that will allow us to identify that particular dead body. So this is an example of medical identification. On the top right hand side of the picture, you can see I have shown the picture of DNA, and the bottom right you can see fingerprint, and bottom left you can see various personal effects, such as we can see there is a personalized belt, which is the name is written Mish. Then we can see personal diary. Then we can see a photograph or a poster which is yet to be uh, submitted for any postal services. So there is a quick disclaimer, because certain pictures that will be shown on your screen in the coming slides are disturbing in nature, and your discretion is very much appreciated. And the usage of this picture is only for educational purposes, and we are completely following the humanitarian forensic norms. So it is only for the education purpose. So this is an image wherein you can see that the person obviously died because of a high impact accident, and he has lost major part of his right upper arm. So identification in such cases will be will be highly unreliable if it is done through visual recognition, because obviously if the relatives or the family persons are brought in for identification of this particular person, then they will be facing severe mental trauma. That's why scientific methods of identification are called in for. Now, this is a second example wherein you can see that the body is in an advanced stage of decomposition. The maggots are all over the place, and maggots have colonized the orifices, that is mouth, nose, and the ears, and as well as the eyes. And visual recognition is of course out of question, and fingerprints is also very unlikely to give anything, because you can see that there is degloving of the skin of the hand, and we may not get any fingerprints from this person. Another example wherein the body is in a bloat stage of decomposition, and again the body cannot be identified visually. This is an example wherein the body is charred, and nothing is left except teeth, because teeth are the strongest structures of the body. They are even stronger than our bones. Teeth, that is the enamel of the teeth, contains 96 to 98% mineral, that is calcium hydroxyapatite, which is highly resistant to all the taphonomic processes. That's why this outlasts almost everything. So this particular person has been literally carbonized, and what is remaining are just the teeth. So forensic odontology will come to rescue, and they will lead to identification if everything is well and going off. So coming to the dental identification, you have understood the different methods of identification and how dental identification can help in these different sorts of conditions. So we have two major categories of dental identification and how it goes. First one being comparative dental identification, just like our fingerprints, just like DNA, just like medical identification. Dental identification is comparative in nature. So in comparative identification, we compare the antemortem, that is before death records, with the post-mortem, that is after death records, and we arrive at various results. So what happens when we do not have antemortem records? We proceed with reconstructive dental identification. More of that I will introduce you in coming slides. So first is the comparative dental identification. It is done when both PM as well as antemortem, AM, antemortem as well as postmortem dental data is available, and it is mostly performed in closed type of disaster victim identification efforts. A good example would be plane crash, and the phases or the flowchart of how this goes is post-mortem is conducted on the dead body, that is the victim, and then the data is collected. It is filled into a Interpol pink form. It is then we have antemortem data that is gathered from the missing person who is suspected to have been died in that particular plane crash, and all that antemortem data is compiled and it is pooled into the yellow Interpol form, and then these two data, that is AM and PM data, are compared, that is reconciliation is done, and we arrive at the identification of the body. Radiographic comparison is the gold standard among all this, right? So in previous slide, we have seen that we are comparing antemortem data with the postmortem data so as to arrive at the identification. The next is the radiographic comparison, which is the gold standard. So on your screen, you can see that there are four radiographs that are placed. The top row is representing the antemortem, that is before death radiographs, and the bottom two are representing the postmortem, that is the after death radiographs. So these particular radiographs are bite wing radiographs, and I have circled the changes or discrepancies with the help of these three red circles. So by comparison, we come across certain differences or discrepancies that can be called, and these discrepancies can be either explainable or they cannot be explained. So by comparison of these, four radiographs, we can say that the person belongs, the anti-mortem radiographs which are representing certain Mr. Suresh, and these post-mortem radiographs which are representing certain Mr. X, because the person has not been identified. That's why we are calling it as Mr. X. So our aim is to assess whether this Mr. Suresh and Mr. X are one and the same, or they are not. So by comparison, we can say that everything is good, everything is matching, except the three circles that I have demarcated. Now the catch here is uh, uh, the catch here is the antemortem radiograph are taken in considered taken in the year 2015, and the postmortem radiographs are taken in the year 2020. So there is a span of good 5 years which is occurring, which is taken place between these two radiographs. So there is a high probability that uh, Usha, there is a fire alarm going on in my building, so I'll need to stop sharing, and it's an emergency, I guess. So please,
Okay, sir.
please excuse me.
Okay, sir. No problem.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hope
Uh,
everything is well. Uh,
so meanwhile, in the conference, sir is like having some urgent work. So I request the Chancellor of APJ Shimla University to start, like say a few words about for this conference.
yes, thank you. And thank you to the forensic.india to collaborate with the APG Shimla University. I am Professor Ramesh Kumar Chaudhary, Vice Chancellor, APGL Shimla University. And we have noticed because of the fire alarm in between, because it used to be emergency, which we understand. Forensic science is a very leading science, and in the post-COVID era also, I believe that forensic science is going to be one of the more research-oriented science, because it's still a lot of research are required to be done. Recently, we had once you see the forensic science, its area is very vast. It is not limited with the thumb impressions or certain postmortem. Now we are looking with as the research is going on, the forensic science is now going to connect it with the cyber security and cyber crime also, where forensic science are trying to find out how we can, though it's a virtual. And I'm very glad that APQL Simla University with the forensic.india has organized such a nice international conference, and a lot of speakers are in the pipeline, which we will listen and get benefited. APQL Simla University is the leading university of the North India, and we have the students from 28 countries and 29 states. It's a very technology savvy universities, and we have implemented the outcome-based education system. We are also offering the BSc Forensic Science and BSc Biotechnology. We have just started. And in this endeavor, Forensic India and a School of Science of the APQL Simla University will promote the research and provide the basic knowledge of the forensic science in the Northern India. So thank you, Diksha, to giving me opportunity. And we
Sorry,
will
sir,
going,
it's
yeah.
Usha. So sorry, sir, it's Usha, not
Achha,
Diksha.
sorry, Nisha. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Nisha. And my head of department is also here of the
Yes.
School of the Science of the APQL Simla University. Okay, so we can move on with the next speaker. And
Thank
thank
you.
you to Nitin and to collaborate and to give us an opportunity. And we will also do further such webinar and collaborations.
Thank you so much for all of your words, sir. It means a lot for us to collaborate with you.
Yeah.
And now we move to our conference. So our next speaker is cyber forensic analyst, Mr. Abhishek Doshi. So I will request you to start like with your work and expertise.
Okay, thank you. So good afternoon, all of you, and welcome to this beautiful webinar and informative webinar organized. So as you all know, that cyber forensic security and cyber crime. Ma'am, can you mute?
Yeah, 1 second.
You have cashew. Give me one.
Okay, so we'll be proceeding with the presentation how the law enforcement agencies and the forensic authorities work for cyber forensic investigation and resolution. So I'll be presenting you a PPT containing various test cases as solved by the forensic investigators at the FSL. And I'll be showing you some tools as well, if time permits. So how they investigate. So I'll be starting off with my presentation. So is the screen visible?
Yes, sir.
So I would be thankful to Forensic.India and APJ Shimla University for setting up such a good platform for the webinar. So myself, Abhishek Doshi, I am a cyber forensic analyst. I've completed my MTech in cybersecurity from Raksha Shakti University. And currently I am working with law enforcement agencies and FSL to solve cyber forensic and their investigation cases. So as the topic, investigation in different aspects of forensic science, we'll be sharing or we'll be showing you here how the cyber forensic experts and how cyber forensic domain works. So firstly, I would like everyone to know that any views or opinions presented in this webinar are solely my views. No other entities are authorized for it, and presenter here, I does not encourage the viewers to adopt fault and illicit practices, which I may show or which you see on the web. Images and contents are only for educational purpose and no copyright infringement intended, as some of the tools shown here are proprietary. So I'll be showing you just the images. So we'll be proceeding with the topics. So you will be learning, or I'll be showing you what exactly forensic is, what digital forensic is, what are the subdomains of the forensic event, the types of digital evidences at crime scenes or when a law enforcement agency raids, what exactly is the chain of custody for the crime scene, for the solution of the digital forensic evidences, what is acquisition and analysis for a particular digital evidences. I'll be showing analysis and acquisition of hard disk and few other digital evidences from the crime scene. And the last would be how the reporting is done. So I'll be proceeding with the definition, basic definitions would be. So what exactly forensic is? It is a branch of science that deals with gathering the evidence and investigating the information regarding the past event, which might be used in the court of law. So the event which already has been occurred or the crime scene which has been occurred. So it is basically an investigation science related to investigation of that particular crime scene or a particular incident. So what exactly forensic does? It collects and examines the particular evidences using scientific tests or standard techniques which are approved by the government or by the standards. So what another it authenticates evidence against crime. So to present it in a legal procedure. Another, the aim of forensic is to prove how digital evidence, here in cyber forensic, the aim is basically to prove how digital evidence can be used to reconstruct a crime or incident, identify the suspects, who the suspects are, and what sort of information and what sort of evidence you can fetch from a particular digital evidence. What is the motive of that particular crime can also be fetched. So what exactly is the digital forensics? It is a subdomain of forensic. So digital forensic is the preservation, identification, extraction, interpretation, and documentation of computer-based evidences or computational device-based evidence which can be used in the court of law. It is a science of finding evidence from digital medias and instruments like computers, mobile phones, server, networks, and any other digital devices, which has a sort of computational or storage power or capacity. The digital forensic team recovers or images the data and investigates the data. So main core aim or motive of a digital forensic is to investigate and find out the evidence from the particular set of raw data or the data found from the evidence side, using the best techniques and tools to solve complicated cases. So it also helps the forensic team to analyze, investigate, identify, and preserve the digital evidence of various types of electronic devices. So what can be there are subdomains of digital forensics as well, where it is classified or based on types of instruments or data fetched. So we'll be looking one by one each of them. So what exactly are the subdomains of digital forensics? So first one is the computer forensics. It basically investigates the data that can be retrieved from a computer or the hard disk of a computer or other storage media or peripherals connected to a computer, like the network interface card or the external hard disk also. Recovering data that user might have hidden or deleted or after doing a particular type of crime and producing it as an evidence before the court of law is the main goal of computer forensic domain. Another domain, another subdomain of digital forensic is mobile device forensic. So as you all know, most of the crimes and most of the population has now been using a mobile device, which is either 4G enabled or is a smartphone. So with the increasing use of smartphones and the technology, the rate of crime is also being increases, especially the cybercrime, cyberbullying, social media frauds or financial frauds are daily increasing. So the main evidence or the main key is the mobile device. So important aspect of a digital forensic can be considered for mobile device forensic. Many proprietary and open source tools are there to investigate this particular mobile devices. So what exactly it deals with the examination and analysis of mobile devices. Mobile devices means the cellular phones. It helps to retrieve phone and SIM contacts, deleted data, contact details, chat, graphic files, call details, IMEI number of a particular mobile, multimedia messages, calendar items, data files, and all sort of information stored over a particular mobile device. Or if the mobile device is connected to a cloud service or has inbuilt facility, that data can also be retrieved using mobile device forensics. I'll be showing you which tools are used by the law enforcement for this particular forensics. Another subdomain is network forensic. So while raiding a particular call center or a company, network forensics comes into a role. It is a subdomain of digital forensic associated with tracking and analyzing computer device and network traffic. What exactly network traffic is? It is the traffic which the computer or the data is shared over a particular network, like on a wireless medium or particularly on wired network. The data can be stored on a particular storage capacity on cloud, or the data transferring over certain routers and topologies can be collected and fetched for network traffic forensics. It can also be used as preventive measures for intrusion detection if any sort of hacker has attacked or any other entity outside the company has attacked. So how can we predict or how can we find out who was the attacker and through which domain or through which backdoor it has attacked? So network forensic comes into picture for that. Another is memory forensic. It deals with the collecting data from the system memory in raw format and carving the data from raw dump. So it is basically used if a virus attack or a malware attack is there. Memory forensics can be helpful to fetch the encryption keys from the memory if the decryptor, if the attacker has stored anywhere in it. All the volatile memory of a computer system or a digital system is always stored in the memory, and memory forensic can be used to retrieve that particular sort of data. So another subdomains, it is an email forensic. You might have received many types of mails or spoof mails, like you have won a lottery and various particular Gmail IDs or fake accounts. So it deals with recovery and analysis of such emails, including detailed email. If on a particular raid or from a particular device, if deleted emails are to be fetched, and email now are very smart enough to synchronize with your calendars, contacts, even the Gmail facility is synchronizing with your daily regular bills. If you get an appointment or for a restaurant, it also synchronizes with it. It has all the processing power to process your invoice, your bills, or your receipt generated over a particular network. If you receive them, email can be used, or email service provider uses it to analyze it. So email forensic also is now a key domain of digital forensic. Another important and most used digital forensic domain is the malware forensic. It deals with the identification if any malicious code or virus or worm is injected into a particular enterprise network or a system. Then malware forensic can help you to detect the weak points or the backdoors which were created and how the incident occurred. Another is cloud forensic. So all of you might be unknowingly or knowingly using this cloud platform by Google or by iCloud. So what exactly the data stored over a particular cloud, and what data can be fetched from that particular cloud is a motive of this particular cloud forensic. It basically deals with recovery and analysis of data and information stored over various cloud storage and services. So what sort of digital evidences? So digital forensic is now almost a part of every crime. So digital evidences, what sort of digital evidences at conventional crime scene can be obtained? If it is a suicide, murder or theft, the digital evidences which can be obtained for investigation are mobile phones, the laptops of the particular person. The DVR is digital video recorder, which stores the CCTV footage of your particular premises. The IP cameras which work remotely over a particular network, which can store certain sort of data. If there is a case of extortion, then the mobile phones, laptops, CD, DVD or flash media can be seized and can be used as a evidence and can be used for obtaining particular sort of information or data. Another, if a child, woman or abuse, if any POXO case is there, then mobile phones or social media accounts can be investigated for gathering particular evidences and information. If there are financial frauds or income tax raids, then these types of evidences which are used are skimmers, mobile and landline phones, laptops, CPU, SIM cards, various digital documents from e-wallets, data storage devices and networking devices. So I would like to share something about skimmers. So skimmers, as you might have used POS machines or swipe machines at your petrol pumps and another shopping carts or shopping malls. They are basically skimmers which can fetch the data from your particular debit card or credit card from the magnetic tapes over it. So many frauds were taking place previously because the data was stored over the magnetic tapes, like your card number, your name, your the debit card expiry date, and other sort of information. So skimmers were used. Skimmers are available at cheap cost from Amazon. So you can get your own skimmer and do that. But nowadays the cards are chip enabled. So the data transferred or the data transmitted over that POS machine is encrypted. So skimmers are not now used over here, and it won't be worthy for a criminal to use it. but previously schemers were used, and we have seen many ATM and fraud cases where schemers were installed over that particular ATM machines, where they could easily get the data from the magnetic tapes, and by shoulder surfing or getting passwords or by getting pins, by viewing your password, they could be able to do the transaction. Another evidence or another crime scene, which is an accident or hit and run case. In such cases, the DVR or CCTV cameras installed nearby the crime scene or the location can be fetched out as a digital evidence for investigation. Through the CCTV cameras, the number plate can be identified, the speed of the particular car can be identified. If it is in wrong way or a particular what time scenario was there, it can be identified. While investigating fake ID and documents, the CD, DVD, flash media, hard disk, CPU, or the printers can also be considered as digital evidences, so as to fetch what sort of data was transferred. So what softwares were basically used, was Photoshop being used, for Adobe Reader was being used. So this type of digital evidences can also be a part of a conventional crime. So in general, any computational and digital data storing devices can be considered as a digital evidence which can be obtained from a crime scene. So this is a pictorial representation of what exactly the digital evidences are. It contains numerous sorts of hardware and software devices which can be used. So I have tried to brief a few of the evidences which comes into picture on a daily basis. So it ranges from computers, the hard disk, memory storage devices, flash drives, media cards, micro or mini, then CD or the DVDs, the IP cameras, the digital video recorders, mobile phones, SIM card, smartwatches and smart TV. So these smartwatches and smart TVs can contain your, if the phone is synchronized with your smartwatch, it also contains certain amount of data which can be synchronized. So this all can also considered as a digital evidence which can get certain amount of data from it. Smart TV. So recently a case was there in Gujarat, Surat, that intimate scenes were captured over from a smart TV's camera inbuilt over it. So this type of evidences can also be there. Any device having computational recording power or data storing capacity can be considered as this evidence. Network devices like switches, routers, your broadband routers, your wireless stations, and the other hardwares can are a part of digital evidence. So the terminology chain of custody is the main terminology or the main document which has to be maintained or which has to be compulsorily followed by the investigating team, whether it be a police agency or a law enforcement agency or a private investigator. The chain of custody should be maintained or should be developed on a regular basis and on a proper manner so that it can be helpful in presenting your case. So what exactly the chain of custody is? The chain of custody in digital forensic is referred as the forensic link, the paper trail, or the chronological documentation of the electronic evidence. It indicates the collection, sequence of control, transfer, and analysis. So from the point of crime scene to presenting the evidence in the court of law, what sort of activities or what sort of processes is being done on a digital evidences should be noted, and who is the in charge, who changes something, who processes the data should also be mentioned over that particular document. So it would be easy for the court of law to get a rough idea about how the data was analyzed and what sort of processes were done on it, so that the data integrity was maintained or not. It also documents each person who has handled the evidence, the date and time it was collected or transferred, and the purpose of the transfer. So a pictorial representation shows that from collection to examination to analysis and reporting. So while connection, it was a particular media, it was a raw data. For examination, the data was extracted from it The analysis produced the particular information which was required or as asked in police query or as asked by the law enforcement, and for reporting it would be finally produced as an evidence in a standard format. So how the digital evidences should be investigated? First, identification should be done, preservation, analyzation, reporting and documentation, and presentation. So I'll be briefing each point. So for identification, what evidence is present at the crime scene? You should identify that. Where it is stored? Is it on cloud? Is it on particular premises? It is stored on particular system, or where it is stored? How it is stored, and which format the data is stored? Is the data encrypted? Is the data easily available? Is it password protected? Everything should be identified and noted in the chain of custody. For preservation, isolation, security, and preservation of the data for investigation is must. If you acquire a particular hard disk or a mobile phone, then external, if you consider mobile phone as an evidence, then you might have installed particular applications. If your SIM card is on or your internet is on, you can wipe off the data from your particular devices. So first, preservation of the data should be done, that by switching it on the flight mode, it should be captured so that another external entities cannot affect it. Another sort of preservation process is using Faraday bags, which provides external radiations or external factors affecting your particular electronic device. So data here is always a volatile thing. So it can be altered within seconds. So preservation and isolation of that particular evidence is an important part of this chain of custody. Analysis. So what tools and techniques should be used for particular digital type of evidences? Many specialized open source and proprietary tools are there in the market for the particular type of to examine or to analyze this particular digital evidences. I'll be showing you a few of them. Documentation. All the visible data must be collected and report preparation of the complete crime scene and investigation. So documentation should be drafted in such a way that even layman could understand it, or if you present it in the court of law, every person there should be able to understand it. It should not be much scientific, neither it should be too much easy, and the documentation should reveal what exact or should easily give out the result, that what exactly was the crime scene and what the evidences were fetched from it. It should try to solve all the queries regarding the case. Another is presentation, get the gathered facts and explain it in the court of law. So before moving towards some practical sessions or demo, I would like to share these two important aspects of cyber forensic domain. First is forensic imaging and second one is hashing. So what imaging is basically, imaging or a forensic copy is a bit by bit or sector. If any one of you from the computer department, you might be knowing this, that it is a bit by bit copy or a sector by sector copy of a physical storage device, including all files, folders and allocated free and slack space. So there is a vast difference between copying the file and imaging the file. So basically imaging a particular hard disk or imaging a particular device will copy or transfer exact all the details. If free spaces are also there, if some chunk of data, if some raw data or garbage data is also there, then also everything from the memory would be transferred over to that evidence or that imaged file. So forensic image should be taken. Only the copy or the copying process is not advisable for a forensic investigator. Forensic image include not only all the files visible to open operating system, but also the deleted files and piece of files left in the slack and free space. If you delete your particular pen drive and if you delete what exactly the storage media or storage devices do, that if you delete, the data is not deleted from the hardware itself. You can recover it unless and until it is overwritten. if you delete 6 GB data from your particular hard disk, unless and until you do not overwrite 6 GB data over it, you might be able to fetch the data from it. So the slack spaces or the empty spaces are also useful during the forensic investigation, and forensic imaging should be done for it. Hashing. Another important term is hashing. Hashing is the transformation of a string of a characters into a usually shorter fixed length value or key. So it basically assigns or transforms the particular file or a set of data into a string of characters, which is irreversible and which is always a unique file, unique string of characters. So particular identity can be maintained of that, or integrity of the data in that file can be maintained. I'll be showing you the demo of hashing also. So we'll be starting on with how the I'll be sharing you with 2 test cases that how investigation of particular devices can be done. So I'll have shared, I have prepared hard disk and mobile forensic, which are majority of the cases. So what investigation or the process of hard disk is that this, on the left side, you may see the hard disk being removed from a particular CPU, and from the right side, it is from a particular laptop. So you should be aware of the hardware capabilities or the hardware architecture of that particular device, so that you can easily take out what from the device, the hard disk. So as I said, imaging is the key important aspect of that particular investigator. So this is one of the kit used at the law enforcement agencies to create an image file of the hard disk. So on the left side, you might be seeing a particular black box which contains that kit. It is the built by the company Tableau. And on the right side, the device shown is the Tableau for an imaging device. On the image of the right side, on the left side is the evidence or the particular digital evidence which was seized during a particular raid. And on the right side of the device is another hard disk which is used for imaging, or which can be as a destination for imaging. So the data or the files from the source image is all copied over, or the imaged over to this particular destination, so that investigators do not directly apply processes on the evidence. Rather, they use this particular 2 image hard disk for processing their data. So in case if there is a failure or if there is some problem, the original evidence or the data over it is always preserved. Another, you can also copy your data from a hard disk to this flash drive also, or you can image can be created over a particular another hard disk also. So image is always created compressed, and the extension of that particular image can be .e01, .ex01, and so on. I'll be showing you a particular image also. So this is the hardware which is used. If hardware is not at the time of raid, hardware is not there, so you can also use the software which is known as Access Data. It is open source for imaging also. So Access Data, you need to install that particular software on your system. You can remotely access your evidence and can create a particular image. Here by placing the image source, you can mention your image destination and the processing will start. One of the important hardware or the software which should be used while using the software for imaging is the write blocker. So here on the left side image, a black box is being shown that Tableau write blocker is there. So what exactly write blocker is? While connecting a system to the hard disk, while connecting your laptop to the hard disk, several commands are transferred between the hard disk and the laptop, and from the laptop to the hard disk. So if a command by mistake is transferred over from the laptop to the hard disk, then the data might get lost or data might get modified. So the data integrity is failed for that particular instance. So write blocker blocks all the commands or all the executions from the laptop to that particular evidence, so that the data over the particular evidence is always preserved and maintained in the original state or the form. So write blocker is always used if you are investigating the particular hard disk directly or accessing it from your remote desktop or from your laptops. So this one tool is used. This is open source tool named Autopsy, which can be used for analyzing your image files or the collected evidence. So here disk image or the VM virtual machine file can be analyzed for a particular instance, and the image file can be added over here. So for basic investigation, the software provides these particular features, like it can find out the recent activities stored over it. It can find the file type identification, that what type of file it is. Is it a doc file? It is an executable file. EXIF parser, it can find all the metadata or the data related with that particular file from the evidences. Keyword searcher, if you want to search a particular keyword based evidence from that particular hard disk, that if it is a Aadhaar card, so if you need to search based on it, then it can be used, keyword searcher. Email parser, all the emails stored over it or in the Outlook section. So it can even help you to analyze the Android files also, and all the other sort of data. So I have added one particular image drive of a particular media card. The extension here on the left side you can see is .e01. So this is image file of a particular media card, which was an evidence. So what exactly the autopsy or what exactly the tools which are used by forensic expert does, it lists out the actual representation of that particular drive or that particular media. So here DCIM folder was there, which contains all the images, the Android folder which contains all the Android files of that particular. This is a media card of a particular Android phone. So an Android folder was created, and the data files or the database files, all the system files were stored over here. You can analyze it as well. The another flexibility of this or the features of these tools are it can filter out your particular files on basis of that extension. Like if you only wish to see the .jpg files, if you wish to see only the images, then you can filter it out by the extension. If you want to fetch only the deleted files, so it also allows you to fetch the file systems or the files which are deleted by the user. If you want, if you have an idea of your particular evidence that the document was only 50 to 200 MB or it was above 1 GB, then you can filter out it on basis of that. Based on keyword, you can keyword search that email messages, another what type of accounts. If your mobile phone is storing your account while logging your information, the browser asks that should your email ID and password, should your login credential be saved? If you are doing yes, then they are saved anywhere here in Android folder in an encrypted form. These accounts can fetch all the data relevant to it and can show over here. So that was basic. Another features are the timeline. So timeline shows a graphical representation that on what date, on what particular days the file was modified or the object was modified, when was it created. The generate report can be generated as per the convenience. The file can be marked or tagged based on your evidence and requirement. Generate report will export the particular files and create a report based in HTML format, PDF format, doc format, and many other types of format which is required. This can be produced in hard copy as well or on soft copies also. Another investigation process is of a mobile phone. So this is the toolkit which is used by the field investigators where a mobile phone could be seized at a particular crime scene and the image file or the data can be extracted. On the left side, you might be seeing that the image from an iPhone is extracted, or the data from the iPhone is extracted over to a flash drive. Always the source side, the left hand side is write protected, so that none of the data or none of the commands from the right side or the destination is overwritten to that particular source to maintain integrity. All these hardwares come with an inbuilt feature of write blocker. This is a UFED kit. Many types of cables are used, C-type, then T100. The cables are marked with their particular tags. So while using that particular evidence, you may get an idea. So you may get a rough idea. So, based on your charging points or the points, you can use that particular table or table to fetch a particular data. The devices or the hardware are smart enough to recommend you the type of cables based on your phones or based on your models or chipsets. So this is one of the proprietary used software used by the law enforcement agencies. This is UFED software, which can extract and analyze data from mobile devices, SIM card, mass storage, that is from the flash drives or hard disks, then drones as well. UFED camera is one feature which can be used. A camera is connected, a lamp type camera is connected over to this particular system. In case if the mobile is broken or if the mobile cannot be connected to a particular system, then the evidence as a screenshot can also be taken using this particular standard tool, which is considered in the court of law. Normal screenshot might not be considered, but using these standard tools and standard methods by the law enforcement agencies, you can take screenshot of that particular screen and can produce as screenshot. So if we select a particular mobile phone and mobile device, it will either detect it automatically using the inbuilt programming and features, or if the mobile is not detected, you can select it based on your chipset model or your module. So what type of extraction can be done using mobile phone? So advanced logical, file system and physical, these are the type of basic extraction from a mobile phone, where in physical, all the data from the particular mobile phone is extracted, may it be deleted or may it be hidden, encrypted, anything. All the file system based files, the database files can be extracted using this file system. If the physical option is enabled, then no need of analyzing another type of evidences. You can directly go with the physical. But if a limited certain amount of data or the database only required, then file system or advanced logical can be used. It can help you to fetch images, then videos and all other sort of context, the synchronized data, everything. If the phone is locked and if the phone is rooted, it can be used to disable or re-enable the user lock. It can be used for lock bypassing, which is mentioned over here. The camera and the screenshot features are used to capture the screenshot from that particular evidence also. So another investigating process or the tools which are used for forensic investigation is of a DVR. So DVR examiner kit or the DVR examiner is a software which is used to examine the particular hard disk or the data retrieved from a particular DVR hard disk. So the file system of DVR hard disk are different. So EnCase, FTK and other tools might not be able to fetch the video files from this particular DVR. So DVR, see here on the left hand side, you might see a hard disk which is connected to write blocker, which is being analyzed by the system or the workstation, so as to fetch all the data containing from the DVR. So DVR would give you the video files which are recorded by the connected CPUs. So this is the DVR which is shown on the right hand side, and this is the flash media where the evidence might be stored. So this is the DVI box. Here is the motherboard, and here are the pins through which the CCTV can be connected. So you must need to know all the hardware configurations and the working of the particular hardware devices so as to investigate in this particular domain. So some investigation tools which are majorly used by the law enforcement and the cyber forensic analysts for acquisition, the leading tools, not the only tools, but the leading tools are from Tableau, UFED, FTK. And for analysis, Autopsy, it is an open source tool. You can use it at your on your devices system as well. Other softwares is a licensed version where the license are to be renewed and installed through dongle, or a particular key is provided to you for a particular system. Another tools are OS Forensic, FTK, NCase. These are all for hard disk and flash drives, especially. They can be used to analyze that particular data from it. So UFED, Mobile Agent, Magnet Axiom, XRY, Doctor Phone. These are the tools used for primary investigation of mobile phones and cellular phones. And DVR Examiner, as I mentioned, is used for examining the hard disk of that particular DVR. So we have observed that while handling the digital evidence, or while producing it, or while acquiring it, many mistakes or many problems are there which are conducted by the investigator or the enforcement or the law enforcement which is raiding is different, and the law enforcement which might analyze it is different. As in the case of police, the police acquires a particular digital evidence from a crime scene and handles it over to the forensic labs. So while the transportation of the digital evidence, or while during the acquisition of that particular digital evidences, many loopholes are being generated which can be harmful for the data integrity stored on that particular digital evidences. So one should take many precautions while handling the digital evidences or while analyzing it. First and most important is the data integrity. The data should not be altered in any sort of manner on that particular digital evidences. As you know, the digital evidences, the data are bits of data. So a minor change or a minor deflection can change the entire case, or the data can be changed. So the data integrity is a key aspect, or should be maintained thoroughly throughout the case, even after analyzing or even after extracting the evidences from the devices. The data should be maintained in the well-preserved and the original form only. Use of Faraday bags for mobile phones so as to protect them from the external networks or the radiation. External radiation might deflect your systems or the hardwares. Handle and transport evidence properly. So many times the mobile screens and the hard disk components are fragile and are very minutely packed over to that particular system. So evidence should be handled well, and the transportation should be done properly. We have received many of the evidences in the broken form, like the screen, maybe the screen was broken. If the hard disk is not transported properly, the shafts over it or the disk over it gets broken, or we receive the particular type of hard disk in non-functional manner. So the case is almost gone from there. So handling and transporting of that particular evidence is also a key aspect and should be handled well. While reading or while acquiring any type of evidence, the evidence or the system should be disconnected from the network, external network, and the interfaces. Like if you are acquiring a data from a particular CPU or laptop, you should enable it on the flight mode. You should disconnect it from the every network which it is connected to. You should see if any cable is plugged in or not, except the power cable. So that other external interfaces can not affect that particular digital evidence which you are acquiring. Collect volatile data at crime scene before shutting down or rebooting. So what exactly volatile data is? The data which can be changed or which are damaged or which are deleted after a system reboot, like if a process is going on my system, if I reboot it, the process might stop and it might not be visible in the next log. So the data, volatile data which are stored on the RAM or the memory should always be primarily be connected at the crime scene before shutdown or the reboot. Note the time in evidence and the state of evidence. So as you all might know that laptops, DVR contains CMOS cells and batteries, which helps the time sector or the time management on that particular evidence. But if that particular CMOS is affected during the transportation, or if the evidence is opened after a long time, then the CMOS might get degraded and the time on that particular evidence might slow down a little bit or might change from the actual time. So while capturing that particular evidence, you should note down the time from that evidence, from the boot file or from the BIOS menu, or from while collecting the DVR, the time which is being recorded for that particular CCTV and the time of that DVR should be noted, so that if any changes in the time zones, then the images the video can be extracted as per. Always try to work on forensic images rather than working on the digital evidence directly. So in that cyber domain or the digital domain, we have a benefit of working on the forensic images rather working on the live system or on the live evidence. So another is that while investigating a particular digital evidence, check the header file and signature of that file. So by right clicking it or by processing it, you may check the file header and signature. As of sometimes we have observed that many of the criminals rename their particular files or change their extension of their particular file into, if the PDF file is carrying some sort of evidences, they may change it to .mp3 file. So on investigation, for primary investigation, we might sometime omit that particular file, that it is an mp3 file. So it won't be considered as an evidence or it is of no use. But always try to check what the file headers and signatures are. Many of the tools and softwares which are used for analyzing does it automatically, but sometimes some files are missed out, which should be examined properly. Do not use or operate the crime scene exhibit after seizure. Yes, this is one of the most problematic scenario which is seen by the forensic labs, that while capturing or while acquiring a particular digital evidence, the investigator or the person at the crime scene tries to use that particular exhibit or tries to use that particular evidence either to capture photo, either to make a phone call, either to save a particular file. So this type of activities break the data integrity, and this should not be followed at any cost. So, and one of the most important factor, as I said, that maintain and document chain of custody ethically. The chain of custody, all the important points or all the processes done on the evidences should be noted down to this particular chain of custody document, so that if an investigating officer changes or if you have to produce the full process, then this chain of custody can be used or can be helpful for your digital evidences. So I may show you hashing. So what hashing is done basically, so I will be showing you. Okay, so I think the time is going on, so I'll be stopping it over here. So I request the moderators to take over.
Dr. Rosen had not finished. I believe now he's back. So he may continue his presentation. Because of the fire alarm, he quitted. And Dr. Birdula, Head of Department of the Sciences, AP Simla University, is also here. She will speak later on.
Okay. So should I take over from here now? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Continue, please.
So I'll start my screen sharing. Yeah, so after a critical break which was induced by the fire alarm, and एक छोटे break के बाद I'm back.
Hope everything is okay there. All was okay.
Yes. We had to, there is a protocol that once this alarm is raised, we have to assemble in a common area, and from there till further instructions, we cannot, go back to respective places. So once they said that the things are under control, I'm back here in front of you. So, 2020 has been an eventful year with the corona, and specifically my region. We faced the cyclone Nisarg a couple of days back, and locusts also, and this thing also will add to the thing that is going on.
Right.
So I think we have covered till this particular slide that how dental identification goes. That is specifically the comparative dental identification, and in that the gold standard is a radiographic comparison, and from comparison we can have 4 possible outcomes, and those are positive identification, which is the highest confidence identification, that the suspected missing person, that is Mr. Suresh or something, is the same as the Mr. X, whose remains we are looking at. The next is the positive and possible identification, wherein our confidence interval is slightly low because of certain other factors like antemortem records may be incomplete, radiographs might not be there, and complete body is not recovered, or only parts of the jaws are recovered. So in those cases, the confidence is slightly dropped, and we say that it is a case of possible identification. That only after all the points are concordant and do not come across any discrepancy which cannot be unexplained. And then we have insufficient evidence, wherein hardly we get any tooth, or we get just a couple of teeth, and by comparison of these couple of teeth with antemortem records, it doesn't make any sense to come across any positive or possible identification. And lastly is the exclusion, that is also an important, that is it tells us that this presumed dead person, Mr. XYZ person, and this particular I'm taking this fictitious name, Mr. Suresh, are not the same. So this is what exclusion means, and exclusion is a very important thing, although it is a negative sort of identification, but it is still very important from the authorities. The work is very much reduced in these cases. So what happens when we do not have antemortem records? And that is the realm of Indian scenario, because in India, patients are not loyal, and they are not going to the same dentist. They are having a very good choice of choosing their dentist, so they are taking treatment from multiple dentists. And even dentists cannot be maintaining the records. So many times antemortem records may not be in place. So we move ahead with reconstructive dental identification, and it is also the method of choice in open disaster victim identification. And the whole purpose of reconstruction is, or reconstructive identification is, dental, biological, personal, and social profiling of the dead body, because all of this information allows the police to narrow down on the possibilities. Let us take an example. I live here in Pimpri-Chinchwad area, and if suppose police call me and they recover a skeletonized remain in their jurisdiction, and I'm called in to give my opinion. So by looking at the skeleton, I'm able to say that this skeleton belongs to a male in their age group of 20 to 25 years, and by a specific characteristics on the teeth, I can say that this particular person was a factory laborer because of certain specific things that, these are more intricate details which I may not be able to explain in this particular lecture. So I am able to give this crucial information to the police, and it is like filters. So this is a skeletonized body, and police will pull in records which are 6 months back, which missing person cases which have not been solved in their particular jurisdiction, and they'll pull all these particular cases. So they get a list of approximately, let's say, 50 cases which have not been solved and which could have been dead, and thus this particular skeletal remains. So they apply these filters to narrow down on their possibilities, and this is how they generate leads, and then the case gets moved on. So okay, cold case can get a lead and it can become a hot case in such cases. And important aspects of profile are age and the sex, of course, because if I tell the police that the particular skeleton belongs to male, it will directly reduce the workload by 50%. Presumably, our sex ratio is 50-50. It will directly reduce their workload by 50%. And same goes for age estimation. So by telling the age, it will reduce their workload. But as age and sex are important aspects, important biological profile aspects of a dead, but they are also needed in living persons, right? Age estimation is also needed in living persons as well, because age matters a lot at many of the things that we come across. So age is important for attaching criminal responsibility, because the punishment is different for an adult, that is 18 years and beyond, and someone who is less than 18. So we are talking about juveniles. So it is definitely depend on the age, that is 18 is the crucial bar here. Then child labor, the Indian Factories Act defines who can do work in the factory. So the different ages here are, we are looking at are 14 and 15 years. And marriage, of course, age is an important thing. For females to get married legally, it is 18. For boys, it is 21. Pension claims, of course, later part of the life, that is ranging from 58 to 60 or sometimes 65 as well. Retirement benefits, almost the same. In employment, now in order to get employed, we have certain minimum values and certain maximum values. So the upper age limit could be 30, 25 or 30, and the minimum age could be 18. So these are the various age bars. So age is a bar at various civil activities that we come across. So same guardianship, civil rights such as right to vote, right to drive a vehicle, right to drink responsibly. So it all comes with the respective age. And of course, the important question of civil sexual offenses, after the Nirbhaya case, major amendments have been brought into our Indian Penal Code in 2013-14, if I'm not wrong. The victim's age, and as well as the perpetrator's age are very much important for the outcome of the case in case of sexual offenses. So that's why we need age, and in case of living persons, and age determination is not possible, because we are not able to pinpoint the age that Mr. X has the age of 19 years, 6 months and 2 weeks. That is not possible, because that is possible only when we definitely know the date of birth, right? So but what is possible is age estimation. So we are giving a best scientific estimate, and that is based on the biological maturity of different physiologic systems of our body. So the systems that we are that are commonly referred to are somatic development, that is the general height and weight of the individual, the skeletal development, the sexual development, that is the appearance of primary and sexual characteristics, and of course the dental development that I'm going to discuss about. So how is age estimated by a dentist? So it is done by studying the tooth development, because tooth develop in a very time bound or an orchestrated manner, which is not disturbed by any other external influences. If you compare dental age estimation with skeletal age estimation, then dental age estimation is highly guarded from external influences like any infection or any changes in the diet, all these different external influencing factors. So dental age estimation is pretty much robust, and it is very fairly accurate. So in case of developing stages, that is teeth begin their development 6 week intrauterine, that is before the birth, that is when the baby is inside the mother's womb. So right up to 25 years, when our third molars, that is wisdom teeth or अक्कल दाढ़ जिसे मराठी और हिंदी में बोलते हैं, they develop. So it is possible till that age. So but after 25 years we are estimating age based on regressional changes or any regressive changes that are taking place. So this is an example of a chart, a chart based age estimation, wherein you take a radiograph of the particular person and then you directly compare it side by side with this particular chart, and then the age which is written, we go in for a best match, and जहाँ पे हमें best match मिल गया, we assign that particular value. So we have different age categories, and how they look on a radiograph are shown on this particular chart. It is called as a chart, dental chart, dental developmental chart. But apart from this chart, there are various other methods by which dental age estimation could be done, and it's a whole lot focus for the current research trend in our field. So next is the sex determination, and as with the age, as age is a very linear parameter, but sex is either, it is biologically, at least speaking, it is either male or it is female. So we can safely call it as sex determination and not sex assessment. So it is possible with reasonable accuracy because teeth and jaw bones show sexual dimorphism. That is, the teeth of males are slightly different as compared to the teeth of females, and they can be summed up into, they can be grouped into metric traits and non-metric features or non-metric traits. So metric traits are those which can be measured. So we have certain cutoff values, that is there are different I won't go into much technicalities, but the mandibular canine teeth, the corner tooth of our mouth, are shown to be the best sexually dimorphic teeth. So if we study them, we have certain formulas, and if we put these figures, by taking actual measurements into this formula, it will tell us whether the person is a male or a female. And we have certain features present in our the lower jaw, which show that features which are specific for males and specific for females. Like males in general have a very strong lower jaw, and females have a delicate ones. And then we have a gonial angle, which is more of a 90-degree or more acute in case of females, and it is more flattened out or more obtuse in case of females. And we have some more traits like this apart from the mandible, that is the lower jaw. Krogman, he was a very famous anthropologist or a physician, I can say, and he has written this wonderful book, The Human Skeleton in Forensic Medicine, and it is still one of the top referred books in case of sex determination. And he ranked the accuracy of sex determination using pelvis at 95%. Means if you have only pelvis bone, we can tell whether it is male or female with a 95% accuracy, and that is very high accuracy. When we have skull, that is reduced slightly, and it is 92%. When we have a mandible, we can tell the sex of the particular skeleton, and the accuracy is 90%. That is still a very high accuracy with which we can tell the sex of the individual. So this particular things tells us that sex specific changes are pretty much concentrated in the pelvis, of course, because females have their separate reproductive organs located inside them, then the skull and the mandible, that is the lower jaw. So just like age, sex determination is also required in living, right? So you must be wondering कि living में sex determination की जरूरत क्या पड़ेगी? चलो खैर समझ में आता है कि dead में as all the external or secondary or primary sexual characteristics will be lost because of the process of decomposition. But what about in living? But there have been certain cases in the not so far past wherein sex determination in living has been called in for, and I'm sure many of you may have come across, many of you might be knowing this case, that is Pinky Pramani case, which occurred in the 2012, if I'm not wrong. and she was a it would be difficult for me to call he or she. Pinky was a track and field athlete who represented India at big stages such as Commonwealth Games and Asian Games, and she even won gold medals for India. And her specialization was 400 meters and 800-meter races. And in her career, she faced allegations about doping with testosterone, and the major allegation that was grabbing the headlines in the year 2012, that her female friend, the name has not been disclosed, her female friend accused Pinky Pramanik for raping her. Now, this was a sensation back then, because how could a female, commit a rape on another female? So that was the whole talk of the town. So, in general, the athletes are, the female athletes too are pretty much masculine because of the kind of activity they are undergoing, and in general, their testosterone levels are also also very high if we compare to general average women. But this was a different case because of these specific allegations. So the police had to respond, and they had to go deep into this particular case. And then different sort of news came. Athlete Pinky Pramanik declared male, and then she was charged with 375, 376, and different speculations were made. Now, although odontology was not involved in sex determination, but molecular techniques were involved, that is Barr bodies, and they were looking for presence of Y chromosome and Y STRs. So the whole point is to tell you about sex determination is needed in living as well, right? Coming to the next important contribution of odontologists to criminal investigations is in cases of abuse, and specifically I'm talking about child abuse. So let me give you certain figures. In India, child is abused every 15 minutes, and that is according to the latest government figures, that is NCRB figures, and that is very distressing. And detection and reporting of abuse kind of uh, falls under the ambit of dentist, and you will understand how it is falling in the ambit of dentist. First, let us go with what are the different types of abuse. So we can have a physical abuse, that is beating the child, and we can have sexual abuse, we can have emotional abuse, that is in the form of giving taunts to the child, not providing proper love and affection. And we can have neglect, that is neglecting the child's medical needs, dental treatment needs, social needs, and basically food needs also. So what is the role of dentist in child abuse and neglect intervention? To observe and examine any suspicious evidence that can be ascertained in the office, to record per legal and court rules any evidence that may be helpful in the case, including physical evidence and any comments from questioning or interviewing the parents, to treat any dental or orofacial injuries within the treatment expertise of the dentist, and referring more extensive treatment needs to the hospital so that the physicians and surgeons can take over, to establish and maintain a professional therapeutic relationship with the family, and to become familiar with the signs and symptoms of different forms of neglect. So when should an abuse be suspected? There are certain telltale signs, there are certain peculiar characteristics of the abusive or neglectful adults, and they are listed as young, usually young parents, which are usually between their 20 to 30 years of age, those parents who are emotionally immature, socially isolated families, poorly controlled aggressive tendencies wherein गुस्से पे कंट्रोल नहीं कर पाते हैं, impulsive behavior, self-centered nature, competes with the child for attention, that is attention seeking behavior, psychologically or physically ill parents, economically disadvantaged, like these situations are very much relevant in these COVID times, because right now many people are facing financial distress situations, and they are uh, they are not able to provide for their families. So cases of abuse are definitely on the rise as of now. And present or past history of substance abuse, that is alcohol or nicotine or hardcore drugs as well, And if the particular parent was abused as a child, then there is a very high chance that particular person will become an abuser whenever they become the parents. And we have certain characteristics which are common for the abused or neglected children, and they can be the youngest in the whole family is more prone for abuse than the child with physical or mental disabilities, because they need extra care and extra attention. That's why the parents are they kind of after a certain limit turn abusive towards them. Then product of unwanted pregnancy, of course, premature or low birth weight babies, and those babies who possess characteristics which evoke negative response from the parents, such as uh, uh, kids who run excessive, who cry excessively, kids who are excessively stubborn. So they are more susceptible to get abused. Additional conditions or situations that may lead to added stress on an already fragile atmosphere include changes in the financial situation that I have already mentioned, uh, employment status, that is loss of job, and family structure, such as family में अगर कोई divorce हो जाता है, या फिर if there is a death in the family, then these are aggravating factors and can lead to abuse of the susceptible child. Some are the following telltale signs from a doctor's point of view, and they should raise a red flag. And if you notice, all these particular injuries are concentrated in the head, neck, and face region, which are the domain of a dentist. Right. So it is not oral cavity which is the domain of dentist, as the dentist is sitting very close to the patient. The patient is seated in a dental chair, and their head, face, neck, all the things are very close to us, and it is very easy for us to examine any sort of injury present in that area. So that makes dentist in a vantage, that takes the dentist in a vantage position to suspect, to catch the signs of abuse. So head injuries such as retinal hemorrhage, which can show in the form of raccoon eyes, subdural hematomas, traumatic alopecia. That means अगर किसी बाल खींचे बच्चे के, then उतना जो patch है hair loss हो जाता है, that is called as traumatic alopecia. The child may have nasal fractures, which is very easy to diagnose. The nasal bridge is deviated. Then we can have orofacial injuries, that is lacerations, cuts and bruises or burns in the lips and the cheek. And then the child can also sustain fractures, and of course the important bite marks. Right. So the child can have bite marks on their cheek, on the neck, and of course, apart from the head, neck, face area, any other part which are, at least primarily beyond the scope of a dentist. So for sexual abuse, we can have symptoms of gonorrhea, HSV2, that is herpes simplex type 2, that is, sexually transmitted disease. Then we have condylomata acuminata, then erythema and petechium, which can indicate forced oral sex as well. Then there are different signs of emotional abuse and for neglect as well. So now, in case of the physical injuries, we saw that bite marks was a consistent feature in case of abuse. So bite marks are not only common for child abuse, but they are also pretty much common in now elderly abuse and spouse abuse as well. And bite marks can also be seen in cases of full-fledged rape as well as in case of assault, where there is no sexual offense taking place. So they can be part of a sporting event as well. I'll give you an example. There was a match between Evander Holyfield and Mike Tyson, two giant weight category boxers, and Mike Tyson ripped off his opponent's ear, the pinna of the ear, completely by his vicious bite. So not necessarily that bite marks are found in sex-related crimes, but they may be found in other crimes as well. So in case of contact sports as well. So as no two mouths are alike, the bite marks must also be unique. So that is the premise. So I have already stated you that every person's mouth is unique. Everyone is having a unique set of teeth. So bite marks, which are the impressions of these teeth, must also be unique because of the unique nature of everyone's mouth. So on your screen, you can see that there are 4 examples of different varieties of bite marks. So on the top left, there is a very good, clearly defined bite mark on the right hand side of that particular. The bite mark was much deeper and it is more vicious, which has resulted into puncture wounds. And on the bottom right, we can see that there is a drag marks are seen because of the person trying to pull off. And then there is a poor child who is having two bite marks which are superimposing each other, along with, of course, the inflammation and bruising of the underlying tissue. And then you can also see that scales were placed in the two of the images, and that is basically for purpose of making it life size. So the bite mark analysis flowchart is like, bite marks are photographed with a scale in place so that the images can be made into life size images. Then cast, that is, impressions of the suspect are digitized on a flatbed scanner. So these particular things that you see are called as cast, or working models of the patient or biter, of course. They are put on the scanner and they are scanned along with the ABF number 2 scale. Along, the purpose is same, so as to make it life size. And then overlays are prepared. That means, in a simple sense, overlays are the biting edges of the teeth. Means the edges of the teeth that will make contact when the mouth is closed. So they are prepared. They are also in life size. And lastly, they are compared with the bite mark. Now the comparison could be direct. That is, these overlays can be directly compared with the bite. If we have the person who is bitten with us, or ideally it is compared with the photograph of the bite. So that was the main part. Now let me begin with certain very key cases, that is landmark cases, wherein forensic odontology was the main highlight of these cases. So this is a case of dental identification, and Adolf Hitler's case is one of the highly elaborated cases. And these are the pictures wherein we can see Adolf Hitler's teeth are very clearly seen. And uh, as I'm a dentist, I can clearly tell that his lower front teeth, that is we call as mandibular anterior teeth, are having poor gum support, and they are having periodontal problems. And he was known for having very bad teeth. He was a vegetarian, and he had bad teeth. He had to go to a dentist, and his name was Dr. Blasch. And he had all sort of different dental treatments gone into his mouth. So he had very bad teeth. So during World War II, when he was facing, the Red Army, that is the Russian army. It was USSR at that time, and he couldn't, refute their aggression, and they were coming towards the Berlin, that is their capital, and he was hiding in a bunker, and that was called as Führer bunker. So when he knew that the Russians are gonna capture him, and just like what they did with the Italian Benito Mussolini, they captured him, and they gave him a kind of death that will put shivers down the spines of their opponents. So he didn't want that kind of a miserable death. So he ordered his personal assistant, or his another general, that I'll commit suicide, and then you'll have to burn my body. So he killed his wife, Eva Braun, and he committed suicide by shooting in the forehead. And then his body was, as per his orders, was burned down with the help of gasoline or petrol, so that his body is not recognizable. The whole point was that he wanted that his body should not be mutilated by the Russian soldiers. So he wanted his body to be totally burned, so that nothing is recognizable. But still, the Russians. These are the pictures which were taken not by Russians, but by his general only. Hitler general. So this was the body which was recovered by the Russians, the Red Army guys, soldiers, and it was brought into a mortuary. I'm not sure whether it was this is a Russian mortuary or it was a makeshift mortuary in Germany only. But his body was highly carbonized, and because of this specific location of this bunker, which was highly protected, the Russian army authorities thought that this must be belonging to someone who is very important. So it must be Führer. So there were rumors at that time that Adolf Hitler has fled to Cuba, South America, and he has not been died in this particular incident. So they thought that uh, let us go down deep and find out whether this is Hitler or not. So they recovered dental treatments that were done from the dead body, and these sort of dental treatments were very rare at that time, and very few people had the privilege to afford that kind of dental treatment. So they suspected that this must be Hitler, and these are the real remains of Hitler's teeth. So these are if you can look at my cursor, this particular piece of fragment is a mandibular anterior zone, wherein we can see 4 teeth, that is mandibular and incisors. Then this is a bridge. This is a prosthetic appliance. This is a bridge, and this is again another type of bridge which is called as a telephone bridge. Trust me, such kind of processes we are not doing right now. It is very rare. And again, there is a particular process called as window crown, which is not done nowadays. It is obsolete, and these remains are still preserved in the National Museum of Moscow, Russia. And recently, these pictures are pretty recent, wherein a group of French researchers took special permission, and they went on to Moscow and studied the remains. And again, the identification was confirmed by DNA as well. So finally, Hitler's identity was confirmed, not at this particular recent age, but at that time only, 1945-46, by matching the dental work with the records kept by Hitler's dentist, that is Dr. Blasch. So these are, yes, so this is Hitler's dental status. You may not be able to apprehend all the information which is in there, but it shows that there is a great amount of dental treatment that has gone into his mouth in order to preserve his teeth. A couple of teeth are having root canal treatment, which I'm sure all of you know what is root canal treatment. And we have fillings, and then we have a lot of prosthetic work, that is crown and bridge work, that has gone into this Hitler's mouth. Now this is an antemortem radiograph. This is a skull radiograph which was recovered from Dr. Blasch, and it shows a telephone bridge. Now this telephone bridge, I'll show you. So this is a telephone bridge. So it looks like a receiver of telephone. That's why it gains its name. So that was pretty rare at that time. So it was seen in Adolf Hitler's antemortem radiograph, and it was also seen in the remains of carbonized remains which were presumed to be belonging to Adolf Hitler. That's how the identification of Hitler was confirmed. Next case discussion is about bite marks, and it is about Ted Bundy, who was America's most infamous serial killer. And this is a landmark case wherein he was convicted by a strong bite mark evidence. And Ted Bundy was a very, notorious criminal who did not leave a single trace, but bite marks was one of the physical evidences that led to his conviction and later on execution. So this is Ted Bundy in custody, police custody. His other names are, he's also known as Angel of Decay, co-ed killer, lady killer, serial killer, and many shows and many movies have been made onto him because, because of his particular legend. His early life, his complete name is Theodore Robert Bundy, also known as Ted Bundy. He was, born in November 24, 1946. I won't go into all these details, but I'll give you brief history about what he was. He had a troubled childhood. Means he was an illegitimate child. He was not born out of legitimate wedlock, and he never knew who were his real parents, and he never knew who were his real parents, and he was also said to have been abused when he was a child, and he was raised by his grandparents. And when he was in college, he also faced certain bitter breakups. So I'll just skip through these slides, and yeah, these are certain fascinating information that I'll share. So he committed a lot of murders. As the name suggests, he was a serial killer, and he committed murders in three waves. The first wave was in 1974 in the Washington, the capital of USA. The second wave was in Utah and Colorado a couple of years later, and then the third wave was in Florida, and that was again a couple of years after the second wave. And the total number of victims is at least 30, and it is based on his confessions. And it is rumored that he has killed well above 100, and 10 of the remains are still unidentified, and 5 known victims have not been recovered. So only out of the 30 confessions, only 15 have been recovered and identified. And when he was interrogated by the police, have you killed 30 women, Ted Bundy replied with a very wicked or cruel grin, and he said, "Put a zero in front of it." He was known that he never cooperated with the authorities. He always, gave mysterious statements. So he said that I have killed 300. Law enforcement believe that he has killed above 100, and his modus operandi was all victims were female, all victims were white, and they were single, they were young, all had dark hair, which they had a peculiar hairstyle. They were usually abducted, that is kidnapped, and then their remains were found at a very secluded place. All the victims were seen talking to a man who was wearing a plaster cast or a sling shortly before their disappearance, and they were abducted in the evening, and they were taken away in a Volkswagen Beetle car. They were severely beaten up around the head. That is, the cause of death was mostly head injuries, and their bodies were dumped in the woodlands, jungle mein dal diye. So I won't go into details of his murders, but I have researched extensively on his case. So this is a list of his victims, and you can see the death of date of murder in front of their names. Some of his victims, and we can see that all have long hair, all are white, no black girls here, all are young. The pattern of his crimes was he would fake that he is injured, he would fake that he has a fractured arm or a leg. That's why he had plaster cast. He would lure the unsuspecting woman to car to help him load his groceries or some other stuff like books and all. Then he would knock them out with a crowbar, and once they're knocked out, there he would drag them into the car while they were unconscious. Then he would handcuff them. He would take them to his location that was secluded in woods, and then he would commit sexual assault. Then he would commit murder, and then again commit sexual assault on the dead body, that is called necrophilia. Then in certain cases, in 4 or 5 cases, he decapitated his victims and took their heads along with him to keep it in his living room as a sign of, as a trophy. And in certain cases, he even buried his victims, and in certain cases, he let them remain in the woods for animal predation. So the evidence that was tested in the court, there were no physical evidence in any of the cases against Ted. The only physical evidence was a double bite mark on the left buttock of one of his victims at Chi Omega home, that is the Lisa Levi. This evidence was presented before the court by forensic odontologist Dr. Richard Suveron, which led to conviction of this Ted Bundy, and that is death sentence, and he was executed on an electric chair. Lisa Levi's right nipple had been bitten almost completely off, and it dangled by a thin strand of tissue. Later, investigators discovered a savage double bite on the left buttock where the attacker had torn at the flesh with his teeth. So this poor girl Lisa was viciously bitten, and of course she was then raped and murdered and then again raped. She had multiple bite marks, but among these multiple bite marks which are present on her nipples and her buttocks, the bite marks that were present on her buttocks were of evidentiary value. Means they had enough points that could have been compared with his dentition, which led to his conviction. So this is an image, archival image of Dr. Richard Suveron taking impressions of Ted Bundy. And these are forensic odontologists who are explaining how bite mark evidence, as this was the first case wherein bite mark evidence was used in American court. So it was a very big presentation that was held up in the courtroom, wherein a big you know a discussion took place, and efforts were made so that the judges, and they have a jury system as well, so that judges as well as the jury understand what is bite mark and how it is helping in identifying that Ted Bundy was the biter. So this is an image wherein Dr. Richard Sweron is pointing towards a picture of Ted Bundy's teeth and explaining the injuries on the body of Lisa Levi based on his dentition. Bundy and his team attempted to question the reliability of bite mark evidence. Now, the scene in America is that even the defense side can rope in their own forensic experts. So, for Ted Bundy brought in his own forensic experts who questioned the integrity and the whole validity of this bite mark evidence. But despite the defense's attempts to discredit the bite mark evidence as unscientific, it did play a key role in Bundy's conviction and many other cases after this one. Then it led to his conviction, and he was executed on 24th Jan 89 with the help of an electric chair. Hanging is done in only certain states, but electric chair was the mode of execution at that time in US. And this was a very very first case or landmark case in Florida's legal history that relied heavily on bite mark evidence. So on your left side you can see Lisa Levi, and now we'll look at the exact evidence that was used in the court. So this is a double bite mark that can be seen on the left side of the buttock region of the victim, and this was a long range view. One issue to consider in a bite mark case is the presence of multiple bites, and multiple bites complicate the whole process of comparison. Now, this is a closer pic of the same particular bite mark, and what you can see here on the screen are the overlays. These are the hollow overlay, and this is the solid overlay, which are compared with the photo of the bite mark. So as Ted Bundy has a very specific arrangement of teeth, he had crooked teeth. That means he had crowding in his lower front teeth, which led to specific bite marks that had been left on the body of Lisa Levi. And this is a close-up of a wax test bite of Bundy's lower front teeth. So we also take test bites on different objects, like we have dental wax. Then we have wax bite exemplars also, and this is the computer generated picture wherein we can only see the crowns of Ted Bundy, and this is a selection of the biting edges taken from the previous image. So the method that was followed was his dentition was examined by Dr. Richard Sweron, who then traced Bundy's dental impression onto a transparent sheet and laid it over on the real size photograph of the bite mark, and we have seen that particular photograph, and that was it. And it positively concluded that Ted Bundy was the person who has left these bite marks, who has bitten these, who has given these bite marks, and he was executed on an electric chair. And so let me come back to the Indian scenario of how forensic odontologists are working here. There is no formal post of a forensic odontologist in government setup. Just like how we have forensic medicine experts, as of date, we do not have forensic odontologists who are posted in civil hospitals. Many times, dentists in government setup are asked opinion in odontology related cases, and these dentists may not be experts of forensics. So government, at least in India, has a tendency कि अगर कोई भी law and forensic related कोई question है, then they are reluctant to call in for private opinion. They just want to go to the employees who are government employees. So any dentist who is in government setup, they can be only BDS as well, who may not be having any specific training in this particular field, may be asked to give opinion, which is kind of unfair. But it is changing, and forensic odontology services are engaged in, currently the trend is increasing, and they are engaged in a case-to-case basis. So they are not full-time employed, but the job is part-time, wherein the dentist is doing his own clinical stuff most of the time, and then they are called in to give their opinion on a case-to-case basis. Forensic odontology is a part-time job in most of the countries, including India, where the person is, doing his private dental practice. He may be a researcher, he may be an academician, or he may be a freelancer. Like I am a academician as well as a private dental practitioner here, and I take up cases on a, as and when they are called in for. So these are some of my papers who are giving a very good overview of what forensic odontology situation here in India is, and it is written in a very minimalistic language. It is not much technical, and you can go and have a look at them. There are a couple of them, and it's a basically three-part series that I have written. The third one is in the pipeline. It will soon get published. And we are also, I'm very pleased to announce that we are having a certificate course here at DPU, that is D.Y. Patil Vidyapith. We are having a certificate course in forensic odontology that is approved by the university. And it's a modular course spread across 6 months, wherein we are covering different aspects. That is not only odontology, we are covering the genetic aspect, the forensic medicine aspect, and the basic investigative aspects as well. So anyone of you, if they are interested, please feel free to contact me. My contact details are in front of your screen. And uh, thank you very much for patient listening. And I can take a couple of questions if you have. Over to you, moderators.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, if you have questions, please go ahead and ask. And I would also like to thank all those at Shimla University, who and Forensic.India who made this event possible. And I say my thanks to you. Yeah. Yes, over to you.
Will anyone like to ask any type of question to our speakers? I think no one wants to ask. Actually, you explain very well, na? That's
Yeah.
why all understand very well. That's why
Yeah.
they have no questions.
I'll take it as compliment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing your expertise with all of us. Despite of having an emergency situation, you still
Yeah,
joined.
indeed was an emergency.
Yeah,
We had to run actually.
Okay, but thank you so much for your
My
overwhelming
pleasure.
gesture कि आप फिर से आगे हमारे साथ join करने
My
के
pleasure,
लिए.
my pleasure. That is the whole point of these webinars, because in spite of all these challenges which have been put across, be it natural challenges or this COVID situation, but the bottom line is that learning must go on, and that is the spirit that we must be having. That is the spirit to cherish.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I would request Dr. Madhura Thakur, HOD School of Science of Shimla University, to say a few words for this conference.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you,
On behalf of APJ Shimla University, I, Dr. Mridula Thakur, HOD School of Sciences, would like to take the opportunity to thank Forensic.India to collaborate with our university for this wonderful webinar and provide us with an opportunity to venture out into the wonderful field of forensic science. The presentations so far have been very informative with very interesting illustrations of the cases and very well presented, be it application of odontology in forensic science or cyber forensic science. With ever increasing rate in the crime and the criminals, the scope of forensic science is quite vast. It also gives me pleasure to inform that this year, our school has introduced 3-year undergraduate course in the field of forensic science and biotechnology. Besides this, we are also running postgraduate courses in physics, chemistry, and mathematics, and also doctoral programs in the field of physics and chemistry. We are looking forward to collaborate with Forensic.India to explore the research opportunities in the field of forensic science. Thank you, Forensic.India. Thank you, Honorable Vice Chancellor, sir, for providing us with this wonderful opportunity. Thank you so much. Over to the moderator now.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. As we end today's event, I would like thank you all for the conference. Your presence today shows a strong commitment to works. In particular, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the speakers for sharing their expertise with us. Your presence helped to make this event a great success, and your enthusiasm and positive spirit helped make our time together both productive and fun. We wish you all the best and hope that you continue to be engaged with the Forensic.India for more upcoming events. Thank you so much. Thank you all. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.